Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you how to make your own potting mix. So let's go. I have a lot of window boxes, hanging baskets, pots, and containers that I use in my garden each year. In fact, just the window boxes alone, I have 9 of those, hanging baskets 15, and then a number of pots and containers. For many years, I used to buy my own potting mix, and that got very expensive. So I started researching how to make my own potting mix. The potting mix that I'm going to share with you today is specifically for pots and containers that would be outdoors. It's not necessarily potting mix I would use indoors when it comes to seed starting. I have many other videos that talk about my seed starting and potting mix that I use for indoor gardening, and I'll be sure to link those down in the description below. When it comes to potting mix, there are a lot of different variations, and the one thing I want to stress is there's no right formula. Don't be afraid to experiment and mix up your own. That's what I've been doing for the last number of years, and I keep changing my ratios just to adjust my needs and based on whatever I have available on hand. Many of the ingredients that I use for potting mix are already ingredients that I had on hand when I was doing my seed starting during the winter months. When it comes to ratios for my DIY potting mix, I'm going to be talking about parts. Parts can be whatever container that you're using. It can be a bowl, it can be a bucket, just each container would be 1 part. In my mix, I like to use peat moss. If you don't want to use peat moss, another great option is coco coir. When it comes to the peat moss, I like to buy it in bulk, and I buy it from a local garden center. Just know that if you are going to use peat moss, it's a good idea to add dolomitic lime. It's basically the powder or pulverized form of garden lime that you would find at a big box store. In my mix, I like to add in compost. I make my own compost, and I have a whole playlist on how I compost. I'll put a link to that down in the description. You can definitely buy your own bags of compost. A lot of stores sell them. I like to use perlite in my mix, and I buy that in bulk off of Amazon. I also like to add vermiculite to my mix, and I buy that in bulk off of Amazon. Now, there are different grades when it comes to vermiculite. There's fine and then there's coarse. Whatever you have that you can get your hands on works perfectly fine. I've done it with both. I've used fine and I've used coarse when it comes to outdoor potting mix, and I feel like they both work equally as well. For demonstration purposes, I'm just going to be using a bowl today for scooping. So 1 bowl would be 1 part. However, since I need a lot of potting mix, I'll normally be filling up 5-gallon buckets. So 1 5-gallon bucket for me will be equal to 1 part. I can't stress this enough. Don't get too hung up on the parts and the ratios. Again, I would experiment and see what works for you, and then you can always adjust it next year. I do want to mention I love reusing potting mix. I currently don't have any old potting mix. I've used it in other places. There is nothing wrong with reusing potting mix. I made a video talking about it. I'll link it in the description below. So if you have old potting mix, you can definitely use it. You just want to amend it so that it's nutritious and works well for this year. If I did have any used potting mix at this point, what I'd probably do is just mix it in with whatever I'm going to be making today. Or another option is to take the used potting mix, put it in the bottom of your pots and containers, and then put the new stuff that you're making on the top layer. The ratio I'm going to be using for my DIY potting mix, which again will be for outdoor use, is going to be 3 parts of peat moss, again you could use coco coir, to 2 parts of compost. I'll be using my own homemade compost. You can use bagged compost. No matter what compost you use, make sure it's fully broken down. You don't want to use fresh compost. It could burn your plants. To a 1/2 part of perlite and a 1/2 part of vermiculite. And then I just sprinkle the top liberally with the dolomite lime. The purpose of the lime is to offset the high acidic levels that you find in peat moss. If you're going to use coco coir, then you don't need to use the lime. And then I mix it all really well, and it's ready to be used. So come with me and I'm going to show you my process for getting all these parts together and mixing them up. You can see I've already started mixing up a small batch here, and this is what it looks like when it's finished. And I'm just using this small metal hand rake, and that makes it easier for me to mix up all my ingredients. Here's a nice big 3.8 cubic feet bag of sphagnum peat moss. I'm currently sitting in my garage, and my garage door is open. It's very well ventilated in here. When it comes to handling peat moss, coco coir, perlite, vermiculite, you don't want to be inhaling any of that in because some of the dust, some of the powder can come up in the air. So you can either wear a face mask or you can bring your materials outside, do all the mixing outside, or in my case, I'm in my garage door is open, so I'm very careful that I'm not inhaling all of this. In this case, 1 bowl equals 1 part, 2 parts, and 3 parts of peat moss. I have a nice big 4 cubic foot bag of horticultural coarse perlite. We're going to add a half a part of that. It doesn't need to be exact, but a half a bowl is equal to a half a part. The purpose of perlite is to provide good drainage. I have a bin of coarse vermiculite. Again, you can use fine or you can use coarse. Either one would be perfect for this situation. Here's a half a bowl, which would be half a part of the vermiculite. The purpose for vermiculite is to provide water retention. Under the tarp behind me is a whole bunch of compost that I made last year. It is very well broken down and it is ready to use. I'm so excited. I'm going to be using a lot of this to make my own potting mix, and whatever is left over I can also use to make new flower beds in my yard. So there's 1 part of compost and another part of compost. Here I have pulverized dolomitic limestone, and you can see that the bag has been opened and I just have it in a 5-gallon bucket so that it keeps it dry, and then I cover it up when I'm not using it. And this is what the dolomitic lime looks like. It's literally a powder, and for the small amount that we just made, I would just sprinkle the top like that. I wouldn't add a lot. I would say if I'm going to use 5-gallon buckets for making my mix, and I'm going to go with the 3-to-1 ratio, then I would use about a handful of this lime. And all I would do now is just mix it all up. And look how nice it's looking as we mix it up. I like adding the compost because I just feel like it's nice, good nutrition that the plants will appreciate. This is just a small amount. When I'm using those large 5-gallon buckets, I can then make a ton more of this in bulk. Once I start planting up my containers, I'll be adding slow release fertilizer into the planting hole. I like to use Osmocote, and I can buy this in bulk off of Amazon. If you're only going to be planting a small amount of containers or pots, it's probably more economical for you to just buy your own potting mix. However, if you're like me and you do use a lot of potting mix in a lot of different containers and pots, try to look into making your own. I just find it's a lot cheaper, and I like that we have control on what goes into our potting mix. There's so many other things you can add to your potting mix. This is how I make my own, but I know that there are a lot of other great ingredients you can add to your potting mix. Let me know in the comments if you make your own potting mix, and if you do, what are your ratios and what do you put in your own mix? And if you've never made your own potting mix, let me know if you're going to try it this year. I'd love to hear from you. Be on the lookout for future videos when I start getting all my container pots filled up with beautiful things. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.